Our next story is Little Red Riding Hood from Grimm fairy tale. Once upon a time there was a little girl who was so sweet and kind that everyone loved her. Her grandmother, who loved her more than anyone, gave her a little cap made of red velvet, which suited her so well that she wanted to wear it all the time. Because of that, everyone took to calling her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother said to her, "Little Red Riding Hood, I've a job for you. Your grandmother isn't very well, and I want you to take her this cake and this bottle of wine. They'll make her feel a lot better. You be polite when you go into her house and give her a kiss from me. Be careful on the way there and don't step off the path, or you might trip over and break the bottle and drop the cake, and then there'd be nothing for her. When you go into the parlour, don't forget to say, 'Good morning, Granny,' and don't go peering in all the corners." "I'll do everything right, don't worry," said Little Red Riding Hood, and kissed her mother goodbye. Her grandmother lived in the woods, and about a half an hour's walk away. When Little Red Riding Hood had only been walking a few minutes, a wolf came up to her. She didn't know what a wicked animal he was, though she wasn't afraid of him. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Thank you, wolf, and good morning to you. Where are you going so early?" "To Granny's house." "And what's in that basket of yours?" "Well, Granny's not very well, so I'm taking her some cake and some wine. We baked the cake yesterday, and it's full of good things like flour and eggs, and it will be good for her and make her feel better." "Where does your granny live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Well, I have to walk along this path till I come to 3 big oak trees, and then there's a house behind a hedge of hazel bushes. It's not very far away, about 15 minutes walk, I suppose. You must know the place," said Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought, "Now this dainty young thing looks like a tasty mouthful. She'll be even better than the old woman, but if I'm careful, I'll be able to eat them both." So he walked along a while with Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "Look at those flowers, Little Red Riding Hood. Aren't they lovely, the ones under the trees over there? Why don't you go closer so you can see them properly? And you seem as if though you're walking to school, all serious and determined. You'll never hear the birds if you go along like that. It's so lovely in the woods. It's a shame not to enjoy it." Little Red Riding Hood looked to where he was pointing, and when she saw sunbeams dancing here and there in the trees, and how beautiful the flowers grew everywhere, she thought, "I could gather some flowers to take to Granny. She'll be very pleased with those, and it's still early. I've got time to do that and still be home on time." So she stepped off the path and ran into the forest to pick some flowers. But each time she picked one, she saw an even prettier one a bit further away, so she ran to get that one as well. And all the time she went further and further into the wood. And while she was doing that, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. "Who's there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "I've got some cake and wine for you. Open the door." "Just lift the latch," said grandmother. "I'm feeling too weak to get out of bed." The wolf lifted the latch and the door opened. He went inside and looked round to see where she was. Then he leapt on the grandmother's bed and ate her up, all in one big gulp. Then he put on her clothes, put on nightcap on his head, pulled the curtains shut, and got into bed. All that time Little Red Riding Hood had been wandering about picking flowers. Once she had gathered so many that she couldn't hold any more. She remembered what she was supposed to be doing, and set off along the path to her grandmother's house. She had a surprise when she got there, because the door was open and the room was dark. My goodness, she thought, I don't like this. I feel afraid, and I usually like it at Granny's house. She called out, "Good morning, Granny," but there was no answer. She went to the bed and pulled open the curtains. There was a grandmother lying with her cap pulled down and looking very strange. "Oh, Granny, what big ears you've got!" "All the better to hear you with." "Oh, Granny, what big eyes you've got!" "All the better to see you with." "And Granny, what big hands you've got!" "All the better to hold you with." "And oh, Granny, what a great grum ghastly mouth you've got!" "All the better to eat you with." And as soon as the wolf said that, he leapt out of bed and gobbled up Little Red Riding Hood. Once he'd swallowed her and he felt full and satisfied, and since the bed was so nice and soft, he climbed back in and fell deeply asleep. And he began to snore very loudly indeed. Just then a huntsman was passing by. The old woman was making such a noise, he thought, I'd better go and see if she's all right. He went into the parlour, and when he came near the bed, he stopped in astonishment. "You old sinner," he thought, "I've been looking for you for a long time. I've found you at last." He raised the rifle to his shoulder, but then he put it down again, because it occurred to him the wolf might have eaten the old lady, and he might still be able to rescue her. So he put down the rifle and took a pair of scissors and began to snip open the wolf's bulging belly. Only after a couple of snips he saw a red velvet cap. A few snips later a girl jumped out. "Oh, that's horrible! I was so frightened. It was so dark in the wolf's belly." And the grandmother began to clamber out, a bit out of breath but not worse for her experience. And while the hunter helped her to the chair, Little Red Riding Hood ran outside and to fetch some heavy stones. They filled the wolf's belly with them, and then Little Red Riding Hood sewed him up very neatly, and then they woke him up. Seeing the hunter there with his gun, the wolf panicked and ran outside, but he didn't get very far. The stones were so heavy that he soon fell down dead. All three of them were very happy. The hunter skinned the wolf and went home with the pelt. Granny ate the cake and drank the wine, and Little Red Riding Hood thought, "Oh, what a narrow escape. As long as I live, I'll never do that again. If Mother tells me to stay on the path, that's exactly what I shall do." The end.